Shalom and welcome to this week's edition of the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be standing in solidarity with the Israeli Defence Force. We'll also be understanding the ethics that makes the Israeli Defence Force such a moral and formidable army. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from Jerusalem in Israel, Elie Piepz. He is the Director of International Affairs at the Israel Defence and Security Forum. Elie, it's an absolute pleasure to have you join us on the Middle East Report, especially all the way from Israel. And as you can see, you're home from home. As you can see, they are set with the Jerusalem lit up at night.
Simon, thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure. And Elie, I also have to thank Barbara Dingle for putting us in touch together. And so I'm very grateful to her. She gets me a lot of very high caliber Jewish and Israeli guests. But do you want to share with us your Jewish story? Now, you were born in Washington, D.C. You've had a very kind of political career as well as also a very successful career in commerce as well. But do you want to share with us what your Jewish life was like growing up in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, and something about your Jewish family as well?
Simon, thank you so much. Yeah, it's, I would say one of the beauties of living in Jerusalem is that it is a center of the world in so many ways, and particularly for those people of faith. So my home ends up being a pathway for so many people of faith coming in, and I get a chance to meet Barbara, and then Barbara connects me here, and then the next thing I know, I'm sitting in face-to-face with you here in London. So really grateful for that opportunity. My background. So I grew up always as a traditionally observant Jew. Family, both my parents also came from a traditionally observant, always had awareness of God. But the generation before that, all four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. In fact, one of my grandmothers was an Auschwitz survivor. When I spent, after I finished high school, I spent some time, a year and a half, studying at seminary in Israel. And it was very common, after you finish that time, you would then travel to Europe on your way back to the States. And it felt like I needed to acknowledge what, I didn't want to just go and have a fun time in Europe, but I needed to acknowledge some of the pain and troubles that my ancestors, or really my grandparents and great-grandparents, had went through just a few decades earlier. And my grandmother said something to me which really stuck. She said, I survived Auschwitz, and the way that I survived is every single day I said, my children will never see this. How could she say that? I mean, she was just barely survived, but she knew, and just that belief, that hope was always there, that if she ever got out, she would do everything in her can to make a world that would not tolerate the kinds of Nazism that existed there. But also she meant it both figuratively and literally. So she actually forbade me to go to Auschwitz and to see. And it taught me that there are very different ways. You know, when you go through a trauma, like a Holocaust survivor, you could react in many ways. You could become much more observant. There are many Jews who have run away from God. I can understand both reactions. Both reactions, to a certain extent, it's very hard for anybody to judge. And I would say both reactions have an element of truth. I think when we come back to October 7th, it's something similar.
Absolutely.
Israel dealt with, and it was not just Israel, it was the entire Jewish people, and I would say anybody who considers themselves not just a person of faith, but who considers themselves a civilized world, should have awoken up on October 7th or October 8th, when they first found out what's happening, and said, how could I be living in a world that this could exist? It should not be acceptable. For the families who are directly impacted by October 7th, how they react, becoming more actively in their Jewish faith, those who are questioning God right now, both of them are very understandable. Both of them is part of the complexity of humanity dealing with these kinds of trauma. And I think that there is some similarity between both the Holocaust, which frankly shaped, I would say, certainly my parents' generation. My parents both were very noticeably the children of survivors, were very much in a survivor mentality. And then I would say my generation, which is a little bit younger and a little bit more removed, I had access, I had a great relationship with my grandparents, and I am just on the shoulders. Everything that I've accomplished is because of them, is that awareness. But I would say I'm in a different mindset where we want to be more active. And I think that was represented by me, or represented in my actions. There are two things. Number one, getting involved in the political space. I grew up in the DC area. I grew up in an environment where most of the people in my synagogue did not express political ideals because they worked for the federal government, and when you work for the US federal government, you were not supposed to express strong political ideas. But I grew up in an environment where everybody was well connected. There was a famous story where there was a person in my synagogue who everybody knew had a very menial job working in the CIA, nothing significant, but he was actually a Holocaust survivor. He was born he was very, very young, maybe 3 or 4 years old. He spoke a number of Eastern European languages, and he would disappear for a few weeks at a time. No one knew why. Why? As I became older, I understood he wasn't a secretary, but that was his cover story. And he was doing obviously much more things during the Cold War. There was a sense that we're not going to talk about what we're doing, but everybody, when you survive, he survived the Holocaust, people, you're trying to make an impact. And for me and my generation, a lot of that was leaving a very attractive and a lovely life that we had in the States and deciding to make my life in Israel. I moved to Israel with the exact purpose to make myself more Jewish. I had a wonderful life. I was involved in the political scene in the US. I was involved in real estate in the US and had good business contacts and wonderful friends, and I still love American sports in many ways. There's a lot of things about America that I enjoyed. But if I wanted to be true and I wanted to be fully Jewish, I felt that required me to be in our natural habitat, which is the state of Israel.
So share what it's like to be home, because that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about being in the ancient covenant homeland of the Jewish people, where your ancestors were from, where the Bible has given us our Judeo-Christian heritage, Judea, which is known as the Jewish people, because the Jewish people are from Judea. So just show us what it's like to be back in the land of Israel, to be working there, to be defending Israel, and more importantly, what you're doing today is really defending the Israeli Defense Force, and really an incredible work and organisation you're doing to install those Jewish ethics within the IDF, and for those 22,000 officers and reservists who make up part of your organisation, as well as the bravery and the courage they show on the battlefield in defending Israel against their enemies.
Thank you. It's hard to put into words what it's like to be living in Israel. As we see behind me, you can see the old city of Jerusalem. And it's a view that I am blessed to have every single day and every single night. I live just outside of the old city walls, and that literally is the view from my home. And my wife and I, we've lived in Israel, and my kids have lived in Israel now for 14 years. The first 11 of those years, we lived first in Judea, and then in Samaria. We were 3 years in Judea in a place called Gush Etzion. And then we moved for 8 years, we lived in a place called Neve Aliza, in a place called Karnei Shomron, the Horn of Samaria. But then when my youngest daughter entered the army and we became empty nesters, we decided that we didn't need a large home in the suburbs, so to speak, and wanted to come back to Jerusalem. And we lived in this area with this phenomenal view. And every single day I pinch myself and I say, why are my wife and I privileged? Have the opportunity to live in this remarkable place. Like, I look at my lineage of my family that I was just describing. They are so much greater, so much more worthy than me. And it just makes me feel that, again, everything that I'm done is coming through the fruition and through the actions of the generations before me. And it is an obligation and responsibility that we have we've been given this gift of Israel and of Jerusalem, and we need to maintain it, we need to build it, and we need to do with it what God expected us to do. And that brings us very much to the organization that I'm affiliated with, Israel Defense and Security Forum. It's an organization that it really grew kind of organically. When you serve as much time, I personally am like the only person who did not serve in the IDF affiliated with the organization. But essentially, it's an organization of people who spent their careers. And when you spend your career in the Israeli Defense Forces, it's more than a 9-to-5 job, right? It is your career, it is your life, becomes part of your identity. When you retire from that, you can't just turn that switch off and just go to the golf course and it's all good. It doesn't work that way, or it shouldn't work that way. And the people who founded the IDSF were exactly that. We spent 30, 40 years in the IDF defending Israel on the battlefield, and I can't just walk away. There is a recognition that the institutional knowledge of what the IDF is and what they're about is something that is necessary in the diplomatic space, on shaping the mindset of the Israelis towards national security. And as we talk about October 7th and all that it was, the Israeli mindset, gratefully, were at a point where we thought national security, yeah, it's there, but we've lived with all of these threats on our border for so long that we're kind of okay with it. We can tolerate this. It began to be acceptable that those who lived near Gaza would build bomb shelters, and they all knew how to get there within 10, 15, or 20 seconds. And that was something that was baked into the cake. We kind of expected that. After October 7th, we now realize that's not acceptable. And I would say our organization, IDSF, were full of senior generals in the military and intelligence and police who understood this was not acceptable, and that now that they're out of the military, they should speak very effectively and forcefully about how we need to take control of our own defense. And we should not just be reliant on whether it's an Iron Dome. We should not be reliant just on international countries to support us. We need to be self-sufficient and self-reliant.
Absolutely. So let's have a look now. This is a few words from the founder of the organisation. This is Brigadier General Reservist Amir Avivi, talking about this unique organisation, which is Israel's Defence and Security Forum.
Hello, my name is Amir Avivi, and I'm the founder and CEO of IDSF Habitchonistim. Today we have more than 2,000 high-ranking officers and commanders promoting Israel's security. Why did I found it? I was very worried. You know, Israel is a country with people that have been expelled from Israel twice. Once, the Babylonians expelled us to Babylon, and the second time, the Romans expelled us from our country for 2,000 years. And now we are back, where I've been here only 73 years. And the big question is, what will ensure Israel's security for generations to come? And unfortunately, this important question hasn't been addressed. People look at the short term. They don't look at the long term and understand the implications of retreating from important places that are like the Jordan Valley or Judea and Samaria. One of the important things we talk about when talking about national security is the question, what's nationalistic about national security? And we understand, without our Jewish roots, without Zionism, there is no national security. There will be no willingness to fight. People won't understand what they're fighting for. So we, all officers and commanders, believe that we need to strengthen our Jewish roots, that we need to connect to the ethos of Zionism, that we need to work hard to secure Israel in the long term, and we need to educate. So this is what we are doing. We are educating the young generation, the pre-army programs, the high schools. We talk to the youngsters about the values of Judaism, of Zionism, about what are Israeli security needs. Why is the Golan Heights important? What's the meaning of the Jordan Valley? How do the towns in Judea and Samaria help secure the area so we can be secure all over Israel? We also write position papers and talk to the government, from the Prime Minister, ministers, MKs, in Israel and overseas. We send papers to the American government. We talk to the Europeans. Our voice is important because it is an authority voice. People who understand, people who have been on the ground, who have fought for Israel for many, many years, and now bring their experience, but also their values to the table and talk about the issues that are so, so important for the people of Israel. So let's come together, all of us. You are all invited to join IDSF, הביטחוניסטים. Learn more about us, read what we write.
And that gives us a real insight into this great organisation that's really installing Jewish values into the heart of the IDF. Elie, just share with us really what makes the Israeli Defence Force, known as the IDF, different from any other Western army, and in effect it's the Jewish values of the IDF that make it such an incredible fighting force, but also gives it its incredible morality. Sadly, we see so much of our mainstream media buy into the lies of Hamas and the Islamist terrorist organizations that don't give Israel the credit that Israel deserves, in the way that the Israeli soldiers will literally put their lives on the line to defend civilians, particularly as we've seen that in the recent conflict in Gaza. So share with us what those Jewish ethics are and why they are so important to the Israeli Defence Force, remembering that the Israeli Defence Force is called a defence force, not an offensive force, which is a huge part of the makeup of the IDF. So,
I'm going to answer that question by going to a place that you may not have expected, which is the Russia-Ukraine war. In the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war, we have a number of foreign diplomats, NATO countries that lived right along the border with Russia, who we're in touch with, and said, you know what, we realize we need to ramp up our militaries. We look at Israel's military, it's robust, it's effective, it has kind of also led into the startup nation. They say if we're going to have to not rely completely on NATO, but we're going to have to be a little more self-reliant, we want Israel to help us with building out our militaries. And came to IDSF, we say, you guys are former military leaders, could you help us? We'll set you up with meetings with our Prime Minister, with our Defense Minister, with the head of military, and you'll have the lay of the land, whatever you want, we'll do. I said, well, it's a very, very generous offer and very high responsibility. I say there's only one thing that I'm going to make a request. The request is, do not want a meeting with your Prime Minister or your Defense Minister or your head of the military. There's only one person that's worth meeting with, and that is your Minister of Education. Understanding that a strong military comes from who you are, what are our values. And if you just create a military and hand a bunch of 18, 19, or 20-year-olds a gun, it can go in a good way, it can go in a bad way. If you start creating an ethos in your country of what you stand for, what you're about, then that military takes off by itself. General Vivi, one of the things, our founder of our organization, one of the things that he has pioneered is the idea that you could have the top military generals, you could have the top weapons, you can have the top strategy, but if it's that military is not based on a culture of understanding who we are, it's worthless. And therefore, IDSF really focuses on making sure that we understand what Zionism is, what the foundation of Judaism that really is a cornerstone of the state of Israel, and by extension, the IDF. And that very much permeates all the way through our military. And I'll make one other point, which I think is key, which is a little bit more personal. In my family, I've got 3 daughters. My youngest daughter is now a commander in a combat unit in Samaria. And she was my least enthusiastic child when we decided to make Aliyah. The other 2 were happy as can be. She's like, nah, I don't want to go. But in 11 years, I get my gun. And I say to myself, when I was 7 years old, I had a lot of dreams of what I was going to be, and this wasn't one of them. None of them came true. My daughter always focused on wanting to have a gun, and as a result, she has one favorite of the mitzvot, of the Jewish laws in the Bible. And what was that mitzvah? What was that commandment? That when you go to war, you have to bring a shovel. A shovel? Why would you need a shovel when you need to bring a weapon? You need to maybe defend yourself. Why do you need a shovel? Shovel is because when you go to the bathroom and you're in wartime, you need to have a shovel to cover up what you did. That's a very bizarre thing. It's a very bizarre command. What's the concept behind it? The concept is when you go to war, in order to go to war, if you are a civilized person, you have to shed some of your civilized sensibilities. You're gonna have to kill someone. We don't do that in normal day life. But you're gonna have to remove some of that to be almost a little bit of a barbarian in order to be effective. What God is saying by this command is saying that you need to make sure that you are gonna come out of this war as a civilized person. So in some ways, you have to shed your civility in order to be effective in warfare. In other ways, you need to double down on civility, and you gotta be more careful about how you go to the bathroom than when you did before. That, I think, in some ways, really puts together what Israel's army is about. Our civilized capabilities and characteristics remain while we're doing the dirty work that we do not want to do. We're forced to do, we're proud to do it. We don't want to have to do it. But we are going to keep our civilized sensibilities, and that's going to characterize us all the way through.
Let's have a look now. This excellent kind of news report put together by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, and this looks at the origins of the IDF, how the IDF was formed, and the values that make up the Israeli Defense Force.
We're standing in the junction of Shiloh, and I'm standing in a very special place in remembrance of the Jewish battalions who fought in the First World War under British command. It doesn't come as a surprise that the big fight between the British and the Turks was here in Shiloh. Shiloh is in the center of Israel, it's strategic. The river of Shiloh goes all the way from Shiloh to the area of Tel Aviv today, to the sea. It's a natural border and place to fight. So this is very strategic. But when we talk about strategy, it's not only about Shiloh, it's about the whole land of Israel. The land of Israel is located in the most geostrategical place in the world. It connects Africa, Asia, and Europe. And it's also the one place that connects all the big religions, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. And this is why any major power in the world will do whatever it can to fight over this land. Before the Jewish battalions were created, there were fierce discussions who to support, the Germans and the Turks or the British. Everything changed in 1917 when the British declared the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration that recognized the right of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland. At that moment, the decision was made. The Jews will fight with the British. These battalions were created, and this specific battalion here in this place, Battalion 38, fought with the British against the Turks to liberate this area. The Jews organized in a battalion for the first time since Bar Kokhba, since the days of the Romans, organized themselves and fought for this land side by side to other British units to liberate it from the Turks. In this fight, we had a very important person, Jabotinsky, who led the squad of 12 soldiers in this fight. And we also know that one of the most prominent and famous figures of Israel, Trumpeldor, was also one of the founders of the Jewish battalions. In the end of the First World War, Israel is dominated by the British with the help of Jewish battalions, and this is pretty much the beginning of what will become in the future the IDF.
It's an incredible thing that our country, Great Britain, played its part in helping to re-establish the modern state of Israel and fulfillment of biblical prophecy, but also play its part in helping to establish what is now Israel's defence force, the IDF. Elie, there has to be huge contrast that I think we need to bring up. I mean, you already shared some of the kind of Jewish values, particularly when it comes to fighting, and something so basic as having a shovel together with a gun was an excellent illustration of really the ethics and the humanity that the IDF show. But share the difference between the IDF and Israel's enemies, because this is where our mainstream media blur the line, because we know that with terror organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or the Houthis or ISIS, they effectively use asymmetrical warfare. They hide behind women and children when they fire at Israel, they fire their rockets, they deliberately put women and children and some innocent civilians in harm's way, and they want the maximum number of casualties in order to increase their cause. But share the difference between Israel and our enemies when it comes to fighting, because I think this is absolutely crucial that our viewers need to get.
You know, I think the question is right on, and I'll say the point that you're making about the difference could not be more stark. Frankly, just the use of human shields, civilians hiding behind them, it's only effective if those who do that think that their adversaries actually care about civilians. And I think that breaks down, it really demonstrates the dichotomy between our enemies, Islamization, radical Islam, and those of us who come more from a Judeo-Christian ethic, those of us who would be repulsed by civilians being used in this situation, and therefore would be inclined to avoid the civilian casualties. By them using human shields, it is a tacit acknowledgement of our moral superiority. It's not just aimed at Israel. It's aimed at the sensibilities of the international community, of the Judeo-Christians around the world that would then use their influence to enforce Israel to stop pummeling them. And I will say, one of the reasons why they think this would be effective, partially is the fault of Christianity. And what do I mean by that? Christianity by its nature is a faith that is based on compassion. It is a compassionate religion. And when Christianity leaves the church, and people try to do it outside of the church, all of a sudden you start having misplaced compassion. The culture is compassionate, but if it's not guided in the proper way, people start having compassion on the wrong side. So you see a conflict, and you very much want to find someone that you want to be compassionate on. And unfortunately, those who tend to be people not of faith end up finding the people they want to have compassion on are the bad guys. There's reasons for that, but I think is the key. And frankly, they're choosing to use human shields is an acknowledgement of our moral superiority.
So let's have a look at this excellent video, which is called Israel's Strategic Assets.
I'm going to say a sentence. You tell me if it's political or not. The land of Israel is the national home of the Jewish people. Political? Unfortunately, the response I generally get today when I say this phrase is that yes, it's a political statement. This approach reflects not only a serious error, but also a danger that could lead to the collapse of the state of Israel. Why? Have you ever considered what Israel's national security strategy is? If you ask senior figures in the security system and government, you'll get a response addressing all sorts of technical issues, like deterrence or alerts. But this approach is outdated and desperately needs to be updated. The main problem is that they fail to address the national components of national security. Why is this so important? Because in order for the people to be able to win, they must want to win. Will is the strongest human motivation there is. There is even an ancient Jewish saying, nothing stands in the way of will. Without the will to win, no army can win, no matter how strong it is. Look around, Russia in Ukraine, the United States in Afghanistan, or Britain here during the mandate period. The outcome on the battlefield is determined not just by weapons, but by the will to win. We as commanders have seen this countless times in war. And what is this will based on? The understanding that the land of Israel is the one and only home of the Jewish people. It is ours, and it is ours to defend. We have no other country, period. No aircrafts or tank divisions can substitute for a national vision. And what's going on with our enemies? While we are neglecting our national identity, the Palestinians are building their own. First, they are manufacturing their national connections with the land, claiming ownership of the land and using our own Temple Mount as a unifying symbol. Second, they are delegitimizing Israel in the international arena as the national state of the Jewish people. They are promoting anti-Semitism and anti-Israel propaganda. They are doing so in educational curriculum and in global and social media. And they are endangering Jews around the world in attacking our national ethos. The result of this Palestinian national strategy is notable on the ground. The Arab public today has a strong sense of national awareness, and Jews around the world are distancing themselves from Zionism, and anti-Semitism is on the rise. This growing Palestinian national awareness is providing them with a strong desire to win. So while the Palestinians are winning on the national level, Israel hasn't even stepped foot on the playing field. Why? Because it's political. If we want to win this war, we need to strengthen our will to win. And this won't happen without strengthening Zionist Jewish values and our national awareness. We must all proudly declare that the state of Israel is ours and teach this to our children. Abandoning our identity will not solve our problems. On the contrary, it will amplify them. We need to get back into the field and announce once and for all that this is our home turf. We need to put the national back in national security. We need to arrive to the next battle, which is just around the corner, with a national security strategy that is proud and clear. Since the days of King David and King Solomon, the Jewish people had never been as prosperous as they are now. But yet we all feel that there is something wrong. There is great discord in our country. This is because we have lost our identity and our national pride. We at IDSF understand this and are working with educators, communities, security experts, media personalities and policymakers to make it clear to all. A strong national identity is the key to our victory. It unlocks our ability to prevail against all threats that face the Jewish people and the state of Israel. The first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, once said, "The fate of Israel depends on two things, its strength and its righteousness." So come on, say it together with me loud and clear without apologies, because this is anything but political. The land of Israel is the national home of the Jewish people.
And make no mistake about it at all that Israel has the most moral army in the world. But we also realise that Israel, amongst all the Western nations, faces the biggest and most dangerous threats, from Hamas in the south to Hezbollah in the north, supported together by the Iranian regime that supports terror proxies like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, even supports Fatah within the Palestinian Authority, the Houthis, even has cultivated the support of Al-Qaeda leadership within Tehran. And yet Israel's morality stands out as a beacon of light in what is a very dark region of the world known as the Middle East. Elie, I really want to talk about October the 7th because, you know, this was a game changer for Israel. I mean, I personally was out in Israel in January. I saw the devastation that Hamas caused on October the 7th myself. I visited Kibbutz Nir Oz. We went past the site of the Nova Music Festival. I've seen one of 3 car parks with 1 or 3,000 cars that the cars are either burnt up or shot to bits with bullet holes. As of the recording of this program, last week I was in the Israeli embassy. They showed us the horror video, which was the atrocities committed by Hamas on October the 7th through their own mobile phone footage and their body cams, which is beyond horrific. And when you see that Israel has every justification to totally carpet bomb Gaza and not care about civilian casualties. But Israel's not like that. The Jewish people are not like that. And Israel's conducting a very difficult war whilst balancing the need to destroy Hamas in Gaza, to ensure that nothing like October happens again, combined with wanting to find and free the hostages, and also then preventing civilian casualties, which is an incredible feat for any Western army. But share with us where you were on that horrific evil day on October the 7th, and when did you become aware of the horrors that were taking place on October the 7th, which was also Simchat Torah, the day of the giving of the law.
Exactly. Simchat Torah is a Jewish holiday that celebrates in traditional Jewish faith, we recite every week in synagogue a section of the 5 books of Moses. And Simchat Torah is both the culmination of that cycle, and we begin the cycle anew. In traditional Jewish learning, you never just celebrate to finishing something, you immediately start beginning again. And Simchat Torah is that celebration. It's just, there's really no responsibilities other than to be happy. Go to synagogue early in the morning, and I live in Jerusalem. You start hearing sirens, and that's unusual. We don't really hear that in Jerusalem too much. It seemed to be in the distance, and we didn't take it all that seriously. My daughter, who I mentioned, is a commander in a combat unit in the IDF, was home for the holiday, was on home leave. And after the second time I hear a siren, I come home and I said, you may want to wake up. She doesn't sleep much when she's on duty, but she does sleep when she comes home, and just make sure everything is okay. And little did she know, she was called up and immediately need to be at her battle stations. And I can tell you, as a father, walking my daughter, not knowing exactly what was going on, but walking my daughter to a vacant street in Jerusalem. It was a holiday, so there was nobody, very few cars on the road. If you've been to Jerusalem, like Shabbat, there's very few cars on the road.
Yom Kippur.
Trying to hail a cab so that my daughter can get to her base. And actually, one of the things that we do in synagogue is it's a time that children come to celebrate dancing with the Torah, with the 5 books of Moses. And there's often a lot of candy and a lot of treats to encourage the children. So all of those candies, the children were no longer going to be coming because the celebrations were largely canceled. All of that candy was designed for the kids. I gave it to my daughter to bring to her base so that they would have some food on the base. Already acknowledging something big was happening, had no idea what it was, and we waited another 12 hours before we really begin to find out and figuring out what was going on. October 7th has changed Israel. It will not be the same, and it remains fluid. I can't say what it will be, because it is a moving process. It is one that we are still dealing with the various stages of grief, how to respond. We're living in a situation right now where still almost 100,000 Israelis are not able to live in their homes in the northern part of Israel. We're living in a suspended reality in many ways, one that we're coming to terms with, one that we are also coming to terms with. How do we speak for ourselves? How do we protect ourselves? And also understanding some of the preconceived notions we had before October 7th, how wrong they were. Without assigning blame, how do we move forward? There's going to be time to maybe potentially assign blame if it's necessary. But right now, we have to figure out how do we move forward. And everybody in Israel has their October 7th moment, has their moment when they found out how it affected them personally and directly. In fact, just earlier this week, one of my friends that I knew, who I thought had been a captive in Gaza, we just found out that his DNA was located in a grave in Israel, and the funeral was on Sunday. It's still happening. It's still real. It's still it's very, very raw. How the country will react, I couldn't say exactly, but I can say that we are much more security-oriented. We are much more focused on who we are as a people. And I think the fact that so many organizations, whether it's UN, whether it is the Red Cross, whether it is women's organizations, that were not there for Israel and for Israeli victims at the time, it led, in some ways, it was obviously shocking and terribly upsetting and really unforgivable. But it also forced Israelis to come to the understanding that we are on this alone. We cannot rely on anybody else. And that self-reliance is ultimately going to build a backbone which is going to change the country for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And Elie, just share with us how Israel's deterrent capabilities were shot to bits on October the 7th, primarily because yourself and every other Israeli would have thought that the Erez crossing was unpenetrable. Yeah. That they would not have possibly thought that anything like what happened on October the 7th could actually happen. I think obviously in the back of your mind and the back of every Israeli mind is the possibility that if we let our guard down for one moment, we're facing another massacre at the hands of these evil barbarians, that is Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hezbollah. And we know the deep-rooted Jew hatred that's in their hearts from their indoctrination through their media and education system. But how does Israel go about restoring those deterrent capabilities, but also the more difficult task then again of restoring trust with the IDF, because many Israelis, including many Israeli diplomats I know, feel very let down by the IDF and by the Israeli government on October the 7th. So how does Israel recover from this? And also, I think also with this, there's an awakening of a Jewish identity. That I've seen this through my Israeli Jewish friends, that they are more in tune with who they are, that they are the people of the Bible, that this is their ancient covenant homeland. And there's a kind of a spiritual awakening within their hearts as well. I know that's a multi-packed question, but feel free to ask that however you want.
We are in a multi-packed environment right now. Wars are not simple and very direct, and you can't compartmentalize. Everything comes together. And that's something that we're dealing with. I would say very simply, when it comes to October 7th and the failures there, obviously on the one hand there will be a formal investigation where we can figure out the materials of what actually materially went wrong, how to avoid that. But at this point, without having access to any confidential information, it was just a failure of conception. We could not conceive that this was possible, to a certain extent, as most in the West couldn't conceive of 9/11. Couldn't imagine that. That's a Tom Clancy novel. That's not actual reality. And I think for Israel it was a very similar thing. And we live in a very dangerous area, that neighborhood, that these kinds of conceptions have deadly consequences. That's what we're dealing with right now. And I think that very much that will change our country. I'm sorry, remind me the multifaceted questions.
I mean, the question is, how does Israel restore its deterrent capabilities?
Yes. So the first and foremost is that we need to completely destroy Hamas. It needs to be unequivocal. And that is something that actually the entire country is unified behind, which is the antidote to October 7th. Pre-October 7th, as you are familiar, there was a lot of divisiveness within Israel on what we call constitutional issues, on judicial reform, which is really a judiciary issue, where there was a sense that we were actually secure, and therefore we could express that the fundamental threat to Israel's existence was a constitutional change here or there regarding how our Supreme Court operates, which is laughable. Unfortunately, it's laughable with tragic consequences. October 7th showed us what an actual existential threat is. And we won't forget that again. I don't think anybody will say an existential threat is some sort of a judicial review reform. That's not the case. When there were those in the military who said that they weren't going to serve, that eroded our deterrence. In practical terms, October 7th, everybody served. We had, not only did we have complete turnout for the reserves, we had 120% presence. Everybody wanted to serve. There was nobody who said, I'm not going to serve. I don't trust this government, even though the government and the military and the intelligence and everybody completely failed on October 7th. There wasn't one part of our government and military and intelligence that didn't have this conception that we were safe, that our deterrence was effective. But unless deterrence is consistently developed and maintained, you can never take your eye off the ball. And we took our eye off the ball.
So let's have a look now at some of the horrors that were committed by Hamas on October the 7th. And this is my own personal visit to one of the car parks that actually shows the devastation caused by Hamas on October the 7th, the burning of cars for 12 or 13 hours together with so many different cars that were shot on October the 7th. These pretty much belong to those who attended the Nova Music Festival. Warning, this is a graphic video that you'll see in terms of what happened on October the 7th. Hi, this is Simon Barrett of Revelation TV in the UK. What you can see behind me is one of the cars that was attacked on October the 7th, the worst mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, where Israel was confronted by approximately 2,000 to 3,000 Hamas terrorists on that day. You can see the carnage they've done with the cars behind me, with these Iranian-supplied grenades that ignite and inflame these cars and actually burn them to ashes. And for those people who really do question whether October the 7th happened, well, here's the crime scene. Here's the evidence of the mass murders that took place on October the 7th. And it's a reminder of the world to wake up, to realize this is terrorism. This is the worst kind of terrorism that we've seen in decades, certainly comparable to 9/11. And the magnitude of the destruction that occurred on October the 7th is nothing less than absolutely horrific and evil. And you can see with the evidence behind the total carnage caused by Hamas back on October the 7th. I want to take you back to October the 7th, and you can see behind me how this beautiful black Audi has been absolutely shot to bits by Hamas terrorists, and around us we see the absolute carnage caused by Hamas on October the 7th. This is real, this happened, and what we're seeing here until recently was a crime scene. You can see car after car after car just parked up here with their windscreens shot to bits, the tyres burnt out. It's a scene of absolute carnage and absolute terror. And to be one of those Israeli drivers on October the 7th when Hamas carried out this terrorist attack must have been absolutely horrific. And the world needs to know what happened on October the 7th. This is the equivalent of what happened in the Shoah or the Holocaust, to realise the true magnitude and the scale of this attack by Hamas back on October the 7th. And honestly, I can say that nothing prepared me for what I saw there. To see cars with bullet holes in them, to see people's own belongings still in those cars, knowing that these were real people and now they've been murdered at the hands of Hamas, and to know that people also burnt alive in their cars as well. It's just a crime against humanity. Not only a crime against Israel, but a crime against our Judeo-Christian heritage, which shows you how evil October the 7th was. We've got about 7 minutes left of the programme, and Elie, I could quite easily do another programme with you because it's so fascinating talking to you. Just share with us the real dilemma that Israel faces in Gaza. Israel's been fighting for about 6 months in Gaza now with incredible progress, but it's so difficult, primarily because of Hamas's hundreds of miles of tunnels that they built, the terror tunnels, together with the fact that there are Israeli hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza. Also dealing with wanting to destroy Hamas and its terrorist infrastructure, at the same time, ensuring that there are very few civilian casualties, combined with the pressure from our government, the pressure from the United States administration, not to go into Rafah and destroy the last remaining stronghold of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. At the same time, wanting to destroy Hamas so that nothing like October the 7th ever happens again. I mean, that, for any Western army, almost seems impossible.
Yeah, it is. It's a major challenge. But again, the challenge and really comes down to a conception. I was talking about the failure of conception of what our enemies could do, and now the conception is the other way around. It's on us. What do I mean by that? Whenever there's a war, then war always gets some sort of name, just tactically. You just had the Gulf War. In Israel, when we had this war, we called it iron swords, right? A very tactical. Iron is a strong metal. Sword is something you use in the military. It's mighty, it's strong. Okay, iron swords. And what it seems the implication is that, like in the previous wars with Gaza, tactical. We'll get a few years of rest, and at some point we'll have to deal with what Gaza really is. But right now we're just tactically going to we're superior. We're going to overpower them. What did Hamas call the war? The translation from Arabic is flooding Jerusalem.
Yep.
What do you mean by that? They're trying to overwhelm Jerusalem. For them, it wasn't a tactical war. It's not about different materials. It's a religious war. And I apologize, I come from an American background, but my American sports analogy, if you go onto the American football pitch, okay, and you think you're playing flag football, a very benign, not aggressive football, and the other side shows up wearing football pads and a helmet, you know very quickly that you're in a tackle football game, not a benign flag football game. Same thing here. Israel thought that we were just going to have a normal skirmish. Our enemy says, no, this is for keeps. What changes with us is that we need to change that mindset, which means our military, means our intelligence, and it also means civil society. Because civil society, which is where just about every single family has somebody serving, which means a parent is not home taking care of their kids, is not running their business. So many things. There's so much, as Britain knows during World War II, when you have an all-out war for your nation's existence, everybody sacrifices. Everybody is stepping up. Everybody is sacrificing because it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It feels like something we have to do. My wife does a lot of exit interviews. She's a psychologist of soldiers who have been on the battlefield. When they leave the battlefield, helping them get back into society, one of the things that come across very clearly is that there is no bravado. Nobody's saying, "Oh my God, look what I did. I need to vent to a psychologist. Let me tell you what I did." No, everybody says, no matter how courageous they were, what kind of commando unit they were in, "Oh, what I did was X," but somebody else, the person who found out the intelligence, that's the person who was the real hero, who really risked themselves. Nobody wants to take any credit, any superlatives. There is a real sense that this is a group effort, and that group effort of the society coming together after a tremendous amount of division within our culture, within the Jewish people, both within Israel and frankly within the diaspora. There was a lot of division. God has never frowned has never appreciated division within the Jewish people. Bad stuff happens. October 7th is just the latest iteration of God respect, or not just God, but I would say the natural reaction to Jewish people being divided is terrible things happening to us. Hopefully we're not going to let it happen again, but certainly for the foreseeable future, we are united in effort to exterminate those who did October 7th and those who want to annihilate us, whether it is the actual Iranians and the Iranian proxies, and frankly, even those allies in the West.
We've just got about 30 seconds left, but the quick question is, how can our viewers get behind your organisation, which is Israel's Defence and Security Forum? Because you're doing a great work. We love the IDF, and one of the greatest pleasures I have when I go to Israel is to meet the soldiers and show them my love and support, because they're doing a great job, because they're defending Israel and they're defending the West. 20 seconds.
Prayer. And I would say, I don't say this smallly, the Jewish people, our army is doing what it can do. Diplomacy, we're doing as much diplomacy as we can do, but we believe in prayer. And prayer probably is the most effective thing that you can do, and encourage your leaders in your country to be supporting Israel.
Elie, it's been an absolute pleasure for you to join us on the Middle East Report. Please send our love back to Israel, and also please let the IDF know that we're standing with them and we're praying for them, and we're with them 100%. And I want to thank you for watching this program at home. I think we've heard some extraordinary stories of what Israel is going through, but let's continue to pray for those brave men and women who are serving in the Israeli Defense Force as they're fighting against the terrorist organization Hamas in Gaza. And I want to thank you for watching today's edition of the Middle East Report.